Hey everyone, my name is Andrew. This is my 12th GDC in a row, so it's been a minute. I've been co-running the Art Direction Summit for 10 years now. I've made all kinds of games. I used to be technical art director for Naughty Dog before starting an artificial intelligence company where we create AI that assists professional creative teams. And so obviously a lot of very vested interest on our side to make sure that artists are supported, empowered, and recognized in this process. Honestly, a lot of use cases, but I think the ones that I'm most excited about is not the ones that everyone's thinking about. But the way I see it in 5 years is actually AI, when done right and responsibly, is a tool that helps us be better artists, fundamentally. And we work so much on that internally, where the idea of AI and the way it interacts with artists today through, for example, our tools, right, is it's an AI that gives you ideas and feedback and brings you content and allows you to solve problems in context. Just to give you a very simple example, right? We have this like general cinematic brain trust that our artists work with, where they build in a level in our reel and then they're just saying, oh, I need some ideas. How would Steven Spielberg do it? And we can immediately use AI to pull up imagery from movies and say, hey, I think you should do it like this, or maybe move it like that. And then that same AI is going to give you feedback and say, I think you're forgetting, color contrast here. Have you considered adding some secondary colors there? And so all of the things that we actually don't get to do as artists because we're so stuck clicking buttons and populating these sparse, empty spaces. Now we can have tools that facilitate, expediting that. And then actually the true value of an intelligent system that can work with me as an artist is something that constantly reminds me how to be a better artist, because that's the problem that I've seen as an art director in the industry, is that it takes somebody, 6 or 7 years in to be like, maybe I should study cinematography, or, let me read this book on color theory. And that is terrible. And so that's kind of our hope with that, is that future is we're actually building machines to help us be better artists.
So you think it's like they're taking like the workload so you can focus on creativity? That could be like summing up.
In so many ways. And I think it's not, you're like starting me on another tangent, but I'll be very quick. Even in my time, right, like games went from $10 million to make a game to $300 million to make a game. And the quality of jobs changed so drastically from, it took 8 people, to make the world in the first infamous game in Sucker Punch. Just 8. And at Naughty Dog to ship Last of Us Part 2, that was hundreds to build those worlds. And the quality of the experience of the artist changes dramatically. We're no longer having creative ownership, contributing a lot of original ideas, where they're literally, propping a corner of the street with a bunch of grass blades and some loose rocks. And, I've interviewed people applying for jobs that are like, yeah, I spent a year making car wheels for GTA. It's like, you have an art degree. And that is what you do. So just the dignity of the creative jobs that we have that we forget to discuss has deteriorated drastically with this absolutely ballooning growth in cost and complexity. And we need to rein it back in. Thank you. I just want to add a little bit of context on it from the technical side that I think is relevant here, which is that I think our initial expectation was, right, that we're going to get AI that does everything but creativity first, and then we're kind of look at what's happening. We're like, wait a minute, it's quite the opposite. And I think an interesting but important way to look at it, and why there's a helpful creative contribution from AI for all intents and purposes, is that most jobs that are not creative fundamentally are a problem with one correct answer. And the beautiful thing about doing art is that it's a problem with an infinite amount of correct answers. And that is why it is so much easier for us to create systems that can contribute with a set of those requirements. And so, I think that's just the little bit of context of like, oh, that is why we are actually going to see more of it applied to creative jobs for quite a while before we're going to get it in legal, where we have to have the absolute best answer, because that is a much, much harder problem, and it's essentially the very long tail. Art is a less of a long tail, where we can play around in that probability space. When I look at AI and being an artist myself, I'm like, it does exactly the same thing I do. I go and learn, and then I take everything that I learned and I apply it in novel combinations. So conceptually, that type of creativity is in no way dissimilar from my creativity. And I don't feel in any way offended that I can get these ideas. And in fact, as artists, we've been doing it for decades. There's a watercolor technique that I've practiced 25 years ago of just splattering colors on a canvas and then just finding images in there, which is conceptually the same. We had concept art tools, 10, 15 years ago. There's a tool called Alchemy, where you literally get vector shapes of random assortment and then say, oh, I'm going to design a spaceship, but I need it to be whatever, influenced by hot rod cars and stuff like that. You would literally get just shapes of that, splatter it on a canvas, and then just start tracing and find something that looks like an interesting silhouette, a shape or design. So we've been using things like that since forever. And so I think saying that it's not creative to me does not make much sense, but it feels like, it's more like protective of how we feel inside. But at the same time, I feel like what's very important to distinguish is that I feel like, failed to put enough accent and attention to the very simple question of how do we create value for other people? Why do other people care about our art? And that is where the actual important thought process happens. It's not, oh, is this creativity or not? It's like, how did I serve others with what I've made? And that is the part where this uniquely human thought process is going to have to be applied, because that discernment of does this serve others in a way that I intended is fundamentally art. And the best definition of art that I could ever come up with, having been doing it for 20 years, has been that the process of creating art is a process of assigning meaning. That is what we do day in and day out in a video game studio when we pick out the type of brick that's going to go on the wall, the shape of that picture frame behind a character, the pattern on their shirt. All we're doing is we're assigning meaning to reinforce a certain thought, a certain mood that we're trying to put into your heart and soul as you're playing through that. And so, and that job we forget to focus on, being too sort of preoccupied with shiny new buttons, or is this, how creative is this? And to me, that matters a lot less than am I delivering on that promise of assigning meaning in ways that takes my audience on a journey and makes it worth their time to come play in my sandbox. I just wanted to contribute there because I think it's very important to make a distinction, and also something just as an artist, I feel like I'm entitled to be offended every once in a while. Modern art and art in general are very different things, right? And there is a section of art that is not measured by the skills of the representative art that you put in there. There are masterpieces hanging in museums that are literally a black square, and that's great. But it is conceptually a very different model of producing value for humans. And so for me specifically, when I talk about art, it is representative art that is meant to serve a purpose for an audience in some way. And I feel like when we're getting into this, it's more of an NFT conversation of a speculative market that creates value based on scarcity and context. And while that is relevant, in some instances, I feel like for artists in this industry specifically, I feel like it's something where we can't really draw parallels as much, mostly because the value of our art is determined by how it enhances a product and an experience, rather than how much of a contextual sort of aura around it we can create to say, yes, this is worth $400,000 because whatever, somebody retweeted it or this or that. And so this is just me on my soapbox. Thank you for entertaining that. I think for me, the important thing is there's a big distinction. I think our general perception of AI these days is just like Mid-Journey. And there's so much more to it in ways that is effective, creative, supportive of artists, and all of the things that, can and should be done right. And in ways that are quite ethical. It's just that, it takes a moment to get it to market at the same scale, because once again, we're trying to do it responsibly. You go through a whole different set of hurdles and constraints, but I think that's step one. So when we're talking about it, we shouldn't just lump all of it together and be like, well, generative AI is unethical. No, unethical generative AI is unethical. Ethical generative AI is quite ethical. And so I feel like those are the first two distinctions. And then the other part, I think for me, just what's relevant, right? Because we interact with a lot of studios. In fact, internally, having been through 1 million of these processes with legal, across all of the biggest corporations on the planet, we kind of want to just put together a little guideline for everyone. Like, these are the questions that you should answer your AI vendors that, going to make sure that your data is secure and that you're not abusing anybody else's data. But conceptually, I think the only thing that is important to be aware of, right, is that when you are using a generative model that you don't know where the data came from and you're making a big, expensive product, you have to be aware that there's a non-zero chance that something that has been generated by it can create a piece of art that, if a human made it, could very legally be sued for copyright infringement. And if you want to run that risk of putting that in your product and then, printing whatever 3 million Blu-rays and then getting those recalled because they contain somebody else's intellectual property, you're going to be in big trouble. And so just conceptually, when we're talking about, the legality of it, there are some very real concerns around IP that if you don't do your due diligence, you can get very, very significantly impacted in all the worst ways. Yeah, I think my perspective on that is Very much still coming from the artist's perspective, where I think back on how we used to work 10 years ago, and I'm making a piece of concept art, and I go online and I pull a bunch of images and I kit bash them in 2D, and it's someone's photo of this and it's someone's photo of that, and I put together a piece of concept art that then, goes into a whatever, a Call of Duty, and helps us generate a lot of value. But it wasn't perceived as offensive as it is right now. And so I think the interesting and, to me, very distinctive feature of fair use that we are forgetting, that pisses me off as an artist, is that fair use implies that the derived work does not compete with the original. And I think that's where it became problematic. It's not that, we can't go and collect images online and create a smart system. Is if we go and collect images online, take those images from people, and then directly threaten their jobs to a point where we're putting their name into the prompt and asking other people to, go essentially steal their intellectual property, that fucking sucks. We shouldn't be doing that. And so I think conceptually the trick here is not as much what is copyrighted, but because, once again, on the internet, on the daily, people are borrowing ideas from each other on an immense scale. And most of the time, we're okay with that. And so the reason we're not is because it's screwing us over financially. So let's figure that part out. How do we actually create this workflow in a way that does not just supplant the people from whom it borrows? And then I feel like even the people that are in that process are not going to be so up in arms against it, because fundamentally all we should want to do is empower artists, right? But there's a very big difference between people that dedicate their life to fine art and making awesome images to, a bunch of kids that are going to go spend $10 on Discord and just generate some flyers for their party, right? And so the same supplanting of the word art that is happening is very much unhelpful here, because Midjourney is not a tool for artists. It's a tool for all of these other people that won't do art. And then how do we make it so that it doesn't compete with artists and figure out the economic incentives around that? I feel like that is kind of, at least for me, the vision for however this copyright resolves. Because yes, we don't want to create very constrictive systems that are going to create more opportunity for litigation, make it that much harder for people feel like they're creative. And I feel like the only offense that we're really feeling and that we're aggrieved by as artists is the fact that it actually just economically disempowers us, which it shouldn't. So let's fix that, and then we can go back to the same fair use that we used to do before, by just like kid bashing photos on the internet. Bob Dylan apparently wrote "Blowing in the Wind" in 15 minutes. We're like, okay, where's the threshold for how many minutes of labor is sufficient to define that this is a very intellectual work? Or like Malevich painted the Black Square. The painting probably took him 30 seconds, but sitting there thinking about it and being like, oh, this is going to be the disruptive piece of art that is going to challenge establishment, was the work. And so I feel like if we think about how to challenge establishment and we have important ideas and then those are manifested in seconds, I don't think that necessarily disqualifies them from being valuable. In democracy, everybody else has the right to deny everybody else progress if it disadvantages them. And as this progresses, we're going to be more and more in a situation where humans working is a bigger hindrance to our productivity than humans not working. And so these people, like, imagine 13 million people that drive a car for a living, all of a sudden don't have to drive cars. They can get together, form a political party, and vote and say no more AI. But that means no more AI that cures cancer, no more AI that helps us fight climate change, no more AI that solves a lot of other important things. And so I think, to me, it's not just a question of, wouldn't it be cool? It's more of a matter of, there's a very clear framework that we have as a society, and it involves people banding together and expressing their views on what affects them and disenfranchises them through their politics. And if we want to progress at the speed that we can, if we want to give everybody the ability to be creative, but also don't really harm others that much and cure diseases and create abundance and all of those things, we have to be mindful of that and not leave these people behind and compensate them for their vote, quite literally. And so I think that's just my way more pragmatic take on UBI. Honestly, my take on it is, it's just going to take AIs to fix other AIs. But I think in general, what you're referring to has to do more with just amplifying the rifts in society that exists already. And so that's the part where I'm more excited, because disinformation has existed. People have believed random crap on social media for decades now. And so I think the part that I'm actually more excited is creating AI that can facilitate proliferation of content that is not just trying to determine whether something is true or not, because to me that's almost a side conversation. I think what's more valuable is this content divisive or not, because that does not actually have to qualify for the truth requirement. And in general, if governments had regulations and government-based algorithms that you have to pass through to publish a piece of content that actually qualifies it not for an opinion, but rather is this presented in a way that's divisive or in a way that is more constructive, I feel like that alone would be quite a substantial shift.